Good afternoon to one and all. Welcome back for the afternoon session. Now, with us, Dr. N. Rukmareka Madam is there. I would like to introduce Rukmareka Madam for the participants. Dr. N. Rukmareka is an associate professor in the School of Computer and Information Sciences at University of Hyderabad, where she has been since 2007. She received a BTech from Geetham University in 2003 and an MTech from Andhra University in 2005. She received her PhD in computer science from the Andhra University in 2014. Prior coming to the University of Hyderabad, she worked as an assistant professor at RVR and JC College of Engineering from 2005 to 7. Her research interests includes information security, cryptography, pervasive computing, and blockchain technology. Much of her work has been on improving the understanding, design, and performance of cryptographic information security and blockchain protocols. 5x1 and A5x3 ciphers that are used to provide over-the-air communication privacy in the GSM cellular telephone standard. She is an author and co-author of over 15 plus papers in reputed journals and conferences on cryptography, pervasive computing, and blockchains. She has organized 6 plus national and international conferences and workshops in cryptography and related areas. With this introduction, I request Rukmareka Madam to take over the session.
Okay, thank you, sir. Am I audible?
Yes, madam, it's audible, madam.
Okay, thank you very much. We're audible also.
Yes, madam, it's audible.
Yeah, thank you very much. Good afternoon, everybody, and my apologies for the delay and inconvenience caused. Right. So, coming to the topic today, since you have been attending sessions on blockchain networks for the past 2 days, so I hope by this time you are aware of what a blockchain is and what is the role that it can play in the society as of now. So this particular session focuses on the various types of blockchain networks. This will be the outline of my talk, where I'll just give you an introduction. I'll not bore you much with the introduction of blockchain because I'm sure you have already 6 to 8 sessions on the introduction of blockchain already. But then we'll look into the various types of blockchain networks. We have 3 categories of blockchain networks to name it. We call them, for simplicity's sake, we call them as public, private, and consortium blockchains. We'll see the key characteristics that they exhibit, their advantages as well as their disadvantages, the consensus algorithms that are followed by these blockchains, and at the end we'll try to compare these 3 blockchains with a conclusion of which one is better or which one is less better, sort of thing. So I'll try to define blockchain one more time as per Merriam-Webster. Blockchain is defined as an open distributed ledger that can record transactions between 2 parties efficiently in a very verifiable and permanent way. There are so many adjectives in this definition. Pardon me for that. But this is a definition quoted by Merriam-Webster when they are defining blockchain, where each adjective, each word has its own significance, if we see. So the open open ledger, when we are saying, when he's saying about blockchains, he's referring it as an open ledger, basically specifying on the underlying blockchain protocols that can be used in that ledger, where it can be a public blockchain or a private blockchain or some other hybrid blockchain. And distributed ledger refers to the fact that the ledger on which transactions are recorded is shared by several participants. So many, the ledger is distributed across the globe in the network, and all the nodes in the network will have a copy of this particular ledger. Transactions, when it comes to the transactions in a blockchain, there is no need, or that is a major advantage when it comes to blockchains, where there is no need for a third party to be involved in the transaction. this of all the transactions that we are taking now, we have a third party, we have a trusted third party namely a bank or a credit card company or some financial institution which is acting a the role of third party, which will be removed in blockchains and thereby reduces the friction because you are sharing your sensitive data over there, and also lowers the cost that is involved because of the third party. Basically, the transactions in blockchain are peer to peer, and then the transactions are permanent once they are entered in the ledger, and they cannot be modified at any given point of time. Immutability is what we are talking about, and I hope you all are familiar with these terms by this time. And then verifiable, the transactions are verifiable in the sense the cryptography involved, the cryptography that was involved behind these blockchains allows these transactions to that you can verify. You I think you already have knowledge of the hash functions that are used in the blockchains, and how a change of a particular transaction can result in change in the hash values of all the consecutive blockchains. Then, so if this is what it is, then what is it that we are looking into? We know this is again one more definition. I'll try to skip it except reading the first point where you say it is cryptography based. We use digital signatures, we use hash functions, we use Merkle trees in blockchains where it is very impossible to crack them and modify certain things. So that is the reason this is distributed ledger. This ledger is tamper resistant. This is distributed across the globe, across the network. You can find a copy of a blockchain anywhere in the network, and it stores the data in a consensus driven peer to peer network. So there is no monopoly that one will be dictating everything. So there is a consensus mechanism involved in blockchains where people agree together and say, let us keep these transactions on the blockchain. So I'll give you a slight history of blockchains, how these blockchains have evolved. We all know Bitcoin white. It all started with the Bitcoin white paper published by Satoshi Nakamoto. No one have idea whether Satoshi Nakamoto is a single person or a group of persons still now, and he published this white paper in 2008 saying I'll be using Bitcoin as a cryptocurrency, and the first Bitcoin block got mined in 2009. The features of Bitcoin protocol is that it is open source, so anyone could take that protocol, edit the source, modify the source code, and have their own version of P2P money. And because of that flexibility that Bitcoin provides, there are hundreds of versions of alternative versions for Bitcoins that came into existence, such as Litecoin, Jetcoin. These are nothing great different from Bitcoins, but alternative versions. And these protocols allow group of people who don't trust each other, that is an environment where there is no trust, to organize themselves to carry out transactions in a specified environment with specific objectives. And this entire scenario of Bitcoins and the alternative versions of Bitcoins is now termed as first generation of blockchain technology. Why are we naming it as first generation of blockchain technology? Because the next generation, or there is another version of blockchain technology people are calling a second generation. That is the reason we opted the earlier one as first generation. Otherwise there is no need for that. So this second generation of blockchain technology started in 2013 when Vitalik Buterin, who was involved in this Bitcoin and the other, sorry, not Bitcoin, the other alternative versions like Litecoin and Zcash projects, he has an idea where he want to decouple the smart contract functionalities from the actual blockchain. And that's how the idea of Ethereum project came into, where earlier in Bitcoins, the smart contract and blockchain are very closely coupled. So he decoupled them, and then he created a single programmable blockchain network that can be used to build various types of applications. So underlying, you will have the same blockchain features what all we discussed: tamper resistant, transparent, immutable, distributed, public, everything will be there. However, because of that decoupling of the smart contract, whatever code that you write in the smart contract, depending on your application, you'll be able to generate a new application. So this second generation blockchain technology gave birth to many types of applications, such as supply chain, healthcare, IoT, land registration. In fact, Telangana and Andhra Pradesh governments have already adopted blockchain technology into land registration applications. And in the first generation of blockchain technology, beyond currency, cryptocurrency, people are not able to see anything. The second generation of blockchain technology have given a lot of ample scope to use blockchains in various sectors of businesses, e-commerce, and all these things. And because of that reason, the decentralized apps have got very much significance with this second generation blockchain technology. In fact, the second generation blockchain technology started with Ethereum, which provided a more flexible environment compared to Bitcoins. It is also a peer-to-peer network, same like the Bitcoin. However, because of the smart contract that was decoupled from there, you just edit those few lines of code in the smart contract, you will get a new application. And because of this advantage and this flexibility, there came multiple number of blockchain applications after Ethereum. Bitcoin, it is designed for a single function, peer-to-peer remittances on a single smart contract. But after Ethereum is designed, you can have any kind of smart contract to enable any kind of direct exchange of value. In Bitcoins, the value or the assets are only cryptocurrency. When it comes to Ethereum, your asset is land, your asset is vehicles, your asset is some supply chain, healthcare data, or if your application is a supply chain management, anything that you are transferring from here to there is your asset. So what is the smart contract? What are the conditions that you impose on? It depends on your application. Healthcare has a different set of applications, whereas land registry has a different set of applications. So there are many projects that came in with this smart contract being decoupled with blockchains. You have Neo, EOS, Hyperledger Fabric. I'll talk about these various kinds of blockchains available in the latest version at the last. But these are many projects that cropped up before after Ethereum, where people slowly started seeing blockchain not as a cryptocurrency but as a technology which can be applied to many applications. So people moved from single purpose blockchains, one smart contract, that is single purpose blockchain is with one smart contract, to a protocol where you can build any type of transaction. So this is a scenario of a blockchain technology stack. This is Ethereum and similar blockchains use that. So if you can see, you have two layers. One is application layer and the other is blockchain layer. So we'll talk about the blockchain layer first, where in the blockchain layer you have your assets, which are nothing but record of the transactions which are maintained as a ledger. But what you have in the assets will be depending on your application. You have certain consensus rules. However, the consensus happens in Bitcoin, so does the consensus happen Ethereum and other blockchains. Also, there are certain governed set of rules with some amount of incentive tokens and all. I hope why we use tokens in Bitcoins and all is already known to you after discussing about Ethereum and Hyperledger Fabric. And you have all the nodes in the network. That is one layer if you look at, and the other layer, the top layer, if you see in the picture is I hope you are able to see the picture. Can somebody respond? Are you able to see this picture?
Yes, ma'am.
Yes, madam.
Yeah, thank you.
Yes, madam.
So, thank you.
Ma'am,
Thank
could
you.
you please
Thank
zoom out? Yeah.
Pardon, Zoom? Yeah. Sorry,
Come
I am presenting through my mobile. So if there is any visibility issue, please
No problem, madam.
speak up
No
and
problem.
let me know.
No problem.
Right. So somebody has to zoom up. I'll try to do that. So this is the upper layer or the top layer where in your relationship with the blockchain. It depends on what application you are going to see, as I told you, healthcare has a different rule set. Then land registry has a different rule set. Supply chain management has a different rule set. So all those behavior rule sets will be defined in the smart contract. You change your smart contract, you define a different application, your smart contract rule set will be changed. Then comes the core topic of our talk, which is what are the types of blockchains. To start with, we have three types of blockchains. We have public blockchains, private blockchains, and consortium blockchains. Public blockchains are the blockchains that we all started learning. Bitcoin is a very good example for public blockchains, where these blockchains are open to anyone with read and write permission. So I can join I'm sorry. So where I can join the network, you can join the network. Any one of us can simply log in and join in the public blockchains. Whereas, however, despite any public being joining into the network, it has its own consensus procedures to ensure what transactions to add and what transactions to stop. Then we have private blockchains where only one organization can form a network. JNT Anantapur can has its own private blockchain. Myself, University of Hyderabad, we can have our own private blockchain where the read permission is open to all within the network. Don't get me wrong. Here, when I say read permission is open to all within the network, here, whereas in public blockchains, read permission is to anybody in the network. You just need to enroll, join the network, and you can read. Whereas in private blockchains, whoever joins the private network, see, unlike public blockchains, not everyone can join private blockchains. You need a membership to join in the public domain or the public blockchain. And here, when it comes to read and write permissions, anybody can read what is there on the blockchain. Whereas when it comes to write permissions, in the decision making of what transactions to keep on the blockchain, they are restricted to only identified members of the organization. This is something like that. All the students, faculty, administration can be part of your private blockchain of a given university. But however, when somebody wants to put some transactions in the blockchain, only identified set of members, say students cannot put transactions in the blockchain, or only certain faculty or only administrative people can keep the transactions on the, it depends again on the particular organizational policy. And then comes consortium blockchains where more than one organization can come together to form a network. Whereas private blockchains are for only one single organization, consortium blockchains are for multiple organizations. Here also read permission is open to all within the network. And when it comes to write permissions, certain constraints are placed on write permissions. Different people from different organizations have this write permission to write transactions onto the consortium blockchains. Private institutions like banks, insurance companies, supply chain heavy industries, all these people, all of them have realized that this single concept of collecting the data storage and management by a distributed ledger, that is the only thing. See, please remember that after all these talks on blockchains, you should be able to understand that blockchain is a technology which can only provide security to the data that is stored on the network. Otherwise, it cannot do any computational things. Yeah, smart contracts can execute certain things, but it's a different thing altogether. It is a blockchain. You only look at the perspective of collecting data storage and management. Only thing that we are using here is that because the ledger is distributed, the ledger is immutable, the transactions are transparent sort of thing. So unlike the public blockchains, industry started to use private blockchains where certain number of people are coming together as an organization and they are using the data with respect to a particular blockchain. However, when permission blockchains came into existence, there was a controversy. Right? We are using people are using the term blockchain with respect to public blockchains as well as with respect to private blockchains. Critics questioned whether a permission ledger where you have trust by a central authority should be considered blockchain at all, because critics said the whole idea of blockchain is to have a decentralized thing, and now you are keeping a centralized authority, and should I call it a centralized authority as a blockchain at all? And the proponents who have proposed this permission blockchain, they came up with a different argument saying that the term blockchain can be applied to any data structure that batches these hashed blocks of transactions. So critics are not so convinced. That's the reason some use public blockchains and private blockchains, or permissionless and permission blockchains. They came up with different names. Where critics, their focus is more on the trusted central authority. Proponents said it is okay with have a central authority, but I have blocked hashes of hashed blocks of transactions, and so this is a blockchain also. Public ledgers, their trust, when they come to consensus mechanism, the trust they provide is trust by maths. What is the maths involved here? How does consensus happen in Bitcoin? Consensus happen by proof of work. So you all know how proof of work happens, right? So where we are trying to find out, or we are trying to guess a hash value, isn't it? That's what we do in proof of work. We are trying to guess certain digits of hash value by a trial and error method. That's it. So you are only trusting by math, whereas in permission ledgers, the trust happens by a legal contract or the smart contract that you have in. Their critics have don't like central authority. Proponents rely on this hashed block of transactions. They trust, or their consensus trust was by maths. These people's consensus trust was by legal contract or by reputation. However, in both the scenarios, the underlying principle is that this is a distributed data storage and is used for verification purposes. That is why after blockchains came into existence, more than blockchain, distributed ledger technology has gained more prominence. So when I'll show you more such tables in the coming slides, but this is one way of looking at how you compare public, consortium and private blockchains. When it comes to consensus determination in public blockchain, everybody, all the miners can play a role. Whereas in private blockchains, only one organization, that too few people from that one organization plays a role. Whereas in consortium blockchain, selected set of nodes from multiple organizations can play this role. Read permission, it is public, everybody can read. In public blockchains, anybody can read the nodes in the public blockchain. And in consortium and private blockchains, we have the flexibility to keep them as public or to restrict it depending on our whatever application we are trying to do. Immutability, it is nearly impossible to tamper any transaction in Bitcoin or for that matter in any public blockchain. Whereas in consortium and private blockchains, because of the consensus mechanism that they use, there could be a chance of tampering the transactions that are stored. However, even if the transaction is tampered, it is easy to identify who have tampered the transaction, because in consortium and private blockchains, you have only people who are members of that particular network. So you can identify them with their membership ID or some other mechanism, and you can take the respective steps to correct it. Efficiency. Here, efficiency is with respect to the throughput of the public blockchain. How fast or how many number of transactions can it do per second? Public blockchain has a very low number of transactions per second. I'll give you the numbers very soon when we talk about them individually. Has a very low number of transactions per second when it comes to public blockchain, because there are so many anonymous users in the blockchain that they need to see, that they need to get consensus from. Whereas in consortium and private blockchain, there are no anonymous users. So you know each and the other, and because of the consensus mechanism, the efficiency or the number of transactions that they approve per second are very high. Centralization, when it comes to centralization, public blockchain is completely decentralized. Private blockchain is completely centralized. And when it comes to consortium blockchain, it is semi-decentralized sort of thing. And when it comes to consensus process, we have permissionless in public blockchain, in the sense the consensus that you take, how you take is with respect to, you need to prove yourself. You don't need any permission. Whereas in consortium and private, it is a private thing that we need to look into. And then this is again another version where we'll see different types of blockchains. So I have already told you that there are 3 blockchains known as public, private, and consortium. In addition to these 3, we have one more category which is very rarely discussed because of its features, known as hybrid blockchain. But this particular blockchain tells you what are all the other parameters which we haven't discussed in the previous slide. One is permissionless blockchain, also known as public blockchain. We call it as permissionless because this doesn't need any permission to join in the network. Examples are Bitcoin and Ethereum. They are open source. You can simply download the source code and join in the network. Any participant can be user, miner, developer, or community member. There are no restrictions in that. All the transactions are fully transparent. Once you join in the network, you can see any transaction of the network. This is fully decentralized in the sense that no one has control on what transactions to keep in the blockchain or in which order the transactions has to be processed. And this permission blockchain is also highly censorship resistant, in the sense since anybody can join in the network, because there is no restriction on location, nationality, gender. There is no restriction on anything. This makes hard for the authority to shut them down. If they want to keep some restrictions on public blockchains, it is very hard for government institutes or higher authorities, some authorities, to take control of this public blockchain, considering the various kinds of users that you have in the network. And then a token is associated with these public blockchains to incentivize and reward the participants whenever their blocks are approved, sort of thing. That is about public. And then coming to private or permission blockchains, the name says private permission because you need permission to join the network. Whereas in the above network, you don't need any permission. Just download the code and join the network. Then how can the participants join in the networks like permission blockchains is that you need to have membership of that particular organization. Suppose say University of Hyderabad has a particular private blockchain, or JNTU Anantapur has a private blockchain of its own. Then JNTU Anantapur will give membership to the members of its own institute. In the sense, to the faculty, to the students, to the non-teaching staff, to the administrative members of that. It will not give membership to every random number whoever apply for membership. So unless you have that membership, you can't be part of the network. Unless you are part of the network, you can't see the transactions in the network. So participants need consent to join the network. And when I'm saying consent to join the network, whose consent do you need? The central authority that was maintaining this particular private blockchain. Transactions are more private and are only available to participants. That's why, as I said, it's a chain link. You can be participant only if you are a member. And unless you are a member, you can't see the transactions. And this is more centralized. Only certain people or certain set of people or very few members of the organization will be taking control of the transactions to be present in this blockchain. So what are the governance structures of that particular blockchain are dictated by them. And this may or may not have a token involved with the chain, because in private blockchains, this tokenization doesn't have much significance. And then comes consortium blockchain, which is governed by a group rather than a single entity. Compared to private blockchains, consortium blockchains are not so different. One major difference that we see is that rather than a single entity, this is governed by a group. Whatever benefits that we have in private blockchain, same we'll have in consortium blockchain. And whatever group we are saying in consortium blockchain, they may cooperate with each other or they may compete with each other. This is something like this. When we are talking about did I lose the connection?
No, madam,
Did I
working.
lose?
No,
No,
ma'am.
no.
Yeah.
Yeah, you are
Thank you.
working, madam.
Thank you. So when it comes to consortium blockchain, suppose say all the real estate people have form a consortium corporation or a consortium blockchain. That is acting in two ways. They cooperate with each other to get their respective jobs done, as well as they compete with each other. So some amount of visibility should be there, as well as some amount of privacy should be there. What all transparency that was expected in public blockchains will be there, as well as what all privacy that you want to have in a private blockchain will also be there in consortium blockchain. And then we have hybrid blockchains. Hybrid blockchains, there is nothing, there is not so much of work available, not so much of literature available with respect to hybrid blockchains. They are slowly developing. It is having the privacy benefits of both permission and private blockchains. And relatively, it has more business significant flexibility. It has relatively more significant flexibility when compared to the other blockchains. And the other important thing that I would like to highlight with respect to hybrid blockchains is that it is a multi-chain network of blockchains. I don't know if we have got this point in the earlier sessions or not. In blockchains, interoperability is a very major issue that people are or blockchain networks are facing. There is no standardization in blockchains. Yeah, this is a very recent technology, and once it has came, everyone came up with their own blockchains. We have one blockchain in some industry, we have another blockchain in another industry, and all. It's good to manage so many amount of blockchains, but with no interoperability, you are not able to achieve common and broader goals. And hybrid blockchains are helping in that sense. Where you have multi-chain network of blockchains, businesses can cooperate with transparency as well as with privacy. So advantage is that you can increase the security of the transactions, and the hash power that is whatever is applied is also lowering, thereby making your transaction speed much faster. So this is one comparison that I would like to show you. As soon as we discuss a few topics, I'll come up with one such table, but all of them are comparing the various types, public, private, and consortium. We don't need permission in public, whereas permissions are required in private and consortium. Anyone can read the transactions in public blockchain, whereas in private, only invited users can read the transaction. And consortium, it is up to you. You need to decide. It is up to your governance rules, which says should your transactions be made public to all users or only to restricted set of users. And when it comes to writing the transactions, anyone who had this mining capability can write transactions in a public blockchain, whereas in private and consortium, only approved participants can write the transactions. When it comes to ownership, nobody has the ownership in public blockchain. Everyone has equal weightage in public blockchain. That is a democratic way of saying everybody has equal weightage in public blockchain. But the truth is that whoever has more mining capability has weightage in public blockchains. That is the reason there is nothing like complete permissionless or complete public blockchains. We theoretically will say that nobody has complete control over public blockchains, but the fact in reality is that whoever has more mining capability will have more control over that particular blockchain. And when it comes to private or consortium blockchains, when it is private, it is that one single organization who is in the governing body will be having control, and in consortium, those multiple organizations who are there in the governing body will be having this control. And are the participants known to each other in these networks? In public blockchain, it is anonymous. Again, I should say this is a democratic way of saying the users are anonymous. Nobody is anonymous even on a public blockchain. It's only that they are pseudonymous, in the sense that it is easy to trace back to the actual identity, or I don't say it is easy, I say it is possible to trace back to the actual user of that particular transaction, but not in a easy way. Whereas in private and consortium, you do any transaction with respect to your membership ID, and it is very easy to figure out who have done a malicious activity in a given transaction, and there are mechanisms to penalize or sue that particular participant. And transaction speed is very slow in public blockchains. It is because there are a number of anonymous users and there is no trust available here. But whereas in private and consortium, there is a little amount of trust was there, because you are not joining everybody into the network. You are identifying that person, and then only when you are convinced you are joining him in the network. That is the reason you don't need to worry about the participants of the network. And since there was a little worry there, you can more focus on the carrying out of more number of transactions per second. That is the reason private and consortium transactions are relatively faster compared to public blockchains. So enough of the comparison. Let us focus on one by one. Some of the things that I keep telling may be repetitive because of the comparisons that I made. Kindly bear with me. But then, when it comes to public blockchain, it is a distributed public ledger. That's what we have been discussing, or that we have been quoting from slide 1. It maintains a record of all the transactions. Because it is public and because it is distributed, the advantage is that it is hard to censor or hack these systems. Right? Yeah, because the ledger is distributed across the globe in the network. You want to modify a transaction that was made 2 days or 3 days in the previous block, say. You can't modify it, because how many places will you modify it? That particular ledger is distributed across the world. It is not that there is only one accountant book and you change it. It could be possible. But this copy is there across many places. And you know what hash functions advantage is when you use them in blockchains. Other thing is, it is a decentralized network. There is no one single authority on top of your head. It allows anyone to transact and join as a validator, but only advantage is that this decision making will be with those set of people who have more mining capability. I can't do mining with one single laptop or desktop on my office or in my home. Right? You need a lot of computing resources to do this mining. And trust is established through consensus mechanisms like proof of work. I'm sure with Ethereum and all, you know what is proof of work and all. We establish trust in these public blockchains through what you call we call it as algorithmic trust, because here the trust is established by the way the algorithm was designed. Because as of now, there are no laws in the almost the entire world, no high-end laws to, you lose certain coins in Bitcoin or in some blockchain. Government is not answerable or not liable to answer for your loss. Whereas you lose something in your home, a theft happens in your credit card or debit card, we have cyber laws for that. Whereas no such legal binding is there for the blockchain transactions. That is why it is very important to bring the trust through other means, and the trust that we are bringing here is through algorithmic means. So that is proof of work. And then the transactions on the network are immutable. We all know it is very difficult to change a transaction once it is stored on the network. Participants can remain relatively anonymous because they are pseudonyms. We use the word relatively anonymous rather directly cutting off saying they are anonymous. And the security that you are applying with this proof of work comes up with a trade-off. it affects your performance, affects your scalability. So scalability and throughput is very difficult in public blockchains. Scalability and throughput are very difficult to achieve in public blockchains. I'll tell you the example for this throughput. Bitcoin handles on an average 4.6 transactions per second. That is the latest information. Bitcoin network, it can be able to process only 4.6 transactions per second. Whereas all the Visa transactions, anybody who has a Visa card, whatever transactions that you are doing, the Visa network, it is able to do 1700 transactions per second. See, where is 4.6 and where is 1700? That is the reason public blockchains are not so apt when it comes to design them for very high volume applications. Visa transactions, if you are allowing around 1700 transactions per second, and if Visa opts some public blockchain where your number of transactions per second is limited to 4 or 5, their entire business will collapse. That is the reason. However, the features that they provide, the public blockchain provides, are not so trivial. Right. So to get the advantages of blockchain, but to increase the scalability and throughput, people move to the other categories of blockchains. Examples are Bitcoin, Ethereum, Litecoin, many such things are there. So this is what anyone can do. Any one of us who is there in this conference, or anyone can do with a simple desktop. You can run a full node on the local device, just validate the transactions by simply downloading the code on the network. Or you can mine a block of transactions. Mining doesn't happen so easily. That doesn't mean mining is impossible. Only thing is that our computing capability should be a little on the higher end. And you can download a crypto wallet or a Bitcoin wallet and send transactions through the network. However, please don't try them, because as per my knowledge, Bitcoins are not legal in Indian government. In the sense, nobody stops you to do the transactions, but if you lose the transactions, nobody is going to help you. That's it. And you can have the public block explorer software where you can see all the transactions that happened. You can as well conduct data analysis on the transactions and all. So public blockchains, they are more on peer-to-peer remittances with a single contract in mind. And then slowly permissionless blockchains came, where they are acting as foundation for business to consumer and consumer to consumer cases. In peer-to-peer remittances, it is more on one-to-one. Whereas in business to consumer and consumer to consumer use cases, it is one-to-many and many-to-many use cases. So many startup companies started building solutions on top of Bitcoin and Ethereum, but with more business orientation. And then look at these key characteristics. Decentralization is the major factor that we talk about when we are talking about public blockchains. And then transparency. All the transactions that are happened in the public blockchain can be visible to any person in the network. How they are ordered, how they are batched into blocks, everything is important, and everything is visible to any user of the network. Anybody, any one of us in the network, whoever joins in the network, can verify them. And anonymity, as I said, that users are more pseudonymous than truly anonymous. It is because there are mechanisms to trace back who the user is or the ID of the particular user. And then governance. When it comes to governance, public blockchains is dealing with two types of governance: off-chain governance and on-chain governance. Off-chain governance is more based on your economic design and monetary policy. It is something like that, right? We have a blockchain, everything functions on it, but when it comes to design policies or some decision making, it happens on a political scenario where some set of ministers or a cabinet meeting happens, the decision is taken, and that decision is implemented in the blockchain. That is off-chain governance. And most of the government implemented blockchains, and as well as industry oriented organizations, use this off-chain governance because most of the decision makings happen in a board meeting or a cabinet meeting. And there is another experiment happening also is on-chain governance model. On the way the transactions are happening, you make the decision making. Uh, uh, this is at an experimental level. And then tokens, there are certain protocols that compensate the network with tokens because in bitcoins we give incentives in terms of bitcoins, and these tokens value increases as the demand for the network increases, as similarly the value of your token also increases. And there are two types of tokens that are used: monetary value tokens as well as utility tokens. Monetary value of tokens are those tokens where you can exchange them for some any other goods, whereas utility tokens are those tokens which can be utilized only in that ecosystem. For example, cryptocurrency, bitcoins, can you use them in the outside world? Especially as of now in India, you can't use bitcoins in a normal shopping mall or any shop that you go and all, right? But however, there are certain countries which legalized bitcoins and they are being exchanged for trade also. And then scalability and performance. This is one major drawback of public blockchains, although it is shown in the key characteristics. This is the Achilles heel of blockchains. However strong it may look like, when it comes to scalability and performance, both the Bitcoin and Ethereum blockchains performance is very poor. With these characteristics, if you figure out what are those advantages and disadvantages, open read and write is an advantage. Anybody can write. Immutability is an advantage. But however, this immutability advantage is carried in permission blockchains also. Security, the amount of security that is given in public blockchains is far above when compared to permission blockchains. More transparency to your transactions. Scalability is possible in blockchains. However, when you scale the number of nodes in the network, you need to have consensus from more number of nodes, thereby reducing your throughput. Scalability is possible. However, the down part of that is it reduces your throughput. And decentralized is that no centralized entity controls the proceedings of a blockchain. But take it with a pinch of salt that we always say public blockchains are decentralized, there is no centralized authority and all, but whoever have more mining power will be controlling the nodes in the network, or will be controlling what are transactions that need to be kept in a blockchain in any given public network. What are the disadvantages of public blockchain? We have been telling that throughput is quite slow. There are only 4 or 5 transactions per second. As per the current technology trends, this amount of transactions is very, very, very low. In fact, it is not low, very poor in fact. And high amount of energy consumption. When you look at consensus mechanisms like public blockchain, the amount of energy consumed is very high. And in fact, a number of people who work for the betterment of the world with respect to global warming and all are very worried the way blockchain technology is improving, because there's a lot of carbon prints that are being released because of this power and energy consumption from public blockchains. And then we have this 51% attack risk. I hope this was discussed in one of the earlier things. The 51% attack risk is that in public blockchains, there may be a chance that if more than 50% of the nodes, smaller number of nodes come together, they can make the network vulnerable by reversing the transactions that are already there in the transaction. This happens by having creating a fork of their own and making that fork grow larger than the actual block size. Then comes the second category, private and permission blockchain. So I'll just compare it point by point when I talk about private blockchains. I compare it point by point with public blockchains. This is also a distributed and public ledger. We can take this as a similarity. This also maintains the records of all the transactions across the globe. And the only difference compared to public blockchains is that The data on these blockchains is available to only participants of the network. So this is not globalized, like anybody can read the transactions on the network. You need to be a participant, and relatively it is easy to censor or hack these systems compared to public blockchains. And then permission blockchains are not decentralized like public. They have a trusted central authority and to authenticate your transactions. And participants are allowed to do transactions, but only when you are a member. So you need to get your membership into the network. And here also trust is established through consensus mechanism again. However, how the consensus happens in public and private blockchains is different. That I'll discuss in the coming slides. Again, the transactions are immutable here also. Once the transactions are there in the network, they are difficult to tamper. However, compared to public blockchains, tampering these transactions on public-private blockchains is relatively easy. It is impossible there. It is possible here, but only thing is that you can trace back to who have done that. And then participants anonymity is there in public blockchains, but here participants need to identify themselves to join and perform transactions in the blockchain. So examples are Ripple and Hyperledger Fabric. So other few points here in private blockchains is that malicious actors cannot gain any advantage. It is because if somebody does a malicious activity, it is easy to trace them back. See, you keep a CCTV in a room and you say, can you expect a theft there? If people know there is a CCTV in that, people do not try to steal something from that room because they are sure that they'll get caught with the CCTV help. So is permission blockchains. You are giving a ID to every member in the network and you are allowing them into the network. So if something goes wrong, some malicious activity happens in the network, it is easy to trace them back. That is why malicious actors do not get any advantage here. The performance trade-off that compared to blockchain is very high. You can do more number of transactions per second. In fact, Hyperledger Fabric is able to do 3,500 transactions per second. The reason is that you don't need to deal with anonymity in private blockchains like public blockchains. There is a lot of anonymous users there. Here you don't have that thing. That is the reason. Yes. Is there a question? Okay. So that is the reason, because if they high throughput, they are very much better suited for enterprise settings, in the sense for commercial business purposes. And as I told in the beginning itself, if a node acts to begin maliciously, it can be quickly apprehended and removed from the network because you have a centralized authority. So because of that reason, people are exploring to use permission blockchain more in the B2B exchanges, in the business to business exchanges. That is the reason blockchains are almost diving with a very high speed into these businesses. Few advantages that you get is that because all the identities of the participating nodes are known, it is a natural protection against cyber attacks. Cyber attacks is that a number of unknown identities enter into the network. Now that is not possible, so it is all obviously resistant to cyber attacks. So you have less number of, you have no number of anonymous nodes. That is the reason you can settle more transactions per second, as well as more privacy also. All transactions are not visible to all participants. It is up to the central governing authority to reveal how many number of transactions or what transactions can be made public. So you have more privacy. Suppose say there is healthcare data. The hospital may maintain my entire healthcare data, but I don't want my health data to be made public to everyone who is working in the hospital. Right. So I don't want my, that is one example. Or otherwise say, being faculty in a university, university maintains its own private data. It has its own transactions, private transactions, but university has number of participants in form of students, faculty, administration, and I don't want everybody to look at my payslip sort of thing. So what transactions to make public, what transactions to be kept private, it can be decided by the governing body of the private blockchains. And okay, we'll discuss this about this proof of stake in a later point. Coming to the characteristics, the privacy is the highest concern, whereas whatever is an advantage there in public blockchains, everything being transparent, this is completely opposite. The data that you keep on a private blockchain is not for public use, so you may be dealing with sensitive data. Healthcare data can be really sensitive, or credit card data can be really sensitive, or when you keep your country's defense data on a blockchain, it will be of at most highly sensitive data, and you can't make it public, even if it is to the employees of that particular network. Imagine the defense strategies of the country being stored in a blockchain so that no one can tamper them, but you can't make them public. Even being a government employee, not every government employee can see the strategies for the sensitivity of the data, that is for the sensitivity that is attached to the data. And then they are more efficient than public blockchains. Efficiency comes with respect to the consensus protocols. The proof of work that was maintained in public blockchains, as I told, is very disadvantageous in respect to energy efficient. The carbon prints that are leaving on the world are very high. So private blockchains move to the other option, where they are looking for a simpler mechanism. They are looking for voting based consensus mechanisms, and they are much simpler as well as more sustainable in the long run. Transaction fee also, these are not volatile in any way. This is with respect to the transaction fees that are involved in the blockchains. When it comes to public blockchains, there is a transaction fee associated with every transaction. And as the demand for the network increases, the transaction fee will also need to be increased to a lot extent, but that is not the case in private blockchains. It will be fixed, it will be low compared to public blockchains, and like public blockchains, that is not based on the demand of the network. So the other is empowering enterprises. Companies empower not only their users but also their organizations with private blockchain. They give high security. These private blockchains are capable of giving high security, whatever the company needs. Also, it saves you money, relatively less infrastructure compared to public blockchains, because you will be only changing the top layer, smart contract layer, but not the entire blockchain layer. So like relatively infrastructure setup cost will be relatively less. We are not saying they are dead cheap, but whatever cost investment that you put in, you can reap them as return on investments. Regulations are better in the sense that you may be coming up with some policies in the network, and you have to follow them accordingly. Same is with public blockchain also, but at a later point of time, if you feel that compared to the circumstances, suppose say now there is corona here, corona pandemic there, and now we need to make some policy changes in the network. It is possible in private blockchains because there is only one single authority. Such policy changes are impossible in public blockchain. And get rid of criminals. There can be a number of malicious users in public blockchains, because as I told, anyone can join the network, and there is a lot of anonymity with respect to the users in the network. But when it comes to private blockchains, you can get rid of those criminals, because all the members are those people who are identified and verified by you. And then decentralization. When it comes to decentralization, public blockchains are purely or totally decentralized. Private blockchains, I don't say they are centralized for that matter. They can be partially decentralized. What extent of centralization or what extent of decentralization do I need can be decided by the governance body, and also depends on the consensus algorithms whichever I am employing in the network. So when it comes to characteristics, 4 characteristics: transparency. It's a question, in fact, because of the central authority involved in the network, transactions need not be transparent. So again, it is up to the business organization to make transactions transparent or not. Privacy. Compared to public blockchains, transactions are very private in blockchains. I'll tell you this example with respect to private blockchains. Hyperledger Fabric. Say, for example, there are two suppliers who are there in doing business with a particular organization, say M. So supplier 1 and supplier 2, both of them are providing some goods to the organization M, and both of them, both S1 and S2, don't want to commit what is a transaction that they are making with M very public on the transaction, very public on the blockchain. It is because, business transactions happen with various strategies, and every supplier or every opponent will be using his own business strategy to be there on the network. So he doesn't want them to be made public. Hyperledger Fabric, for that matter, I guess, since you have listened to the talk in the morning, you have heard about channels where your transactions can be made, and once you are committed, can only you can keep them publicly on the blockchain. When it comes to tokens, you can have these permission blockchains generally don't employ any sort of monetary tokens, but few companies are coming up with the utility tokens. Scalability and performance, they are relatively much better compared to public blockchains. They enjoy better scalability and better performance. I told you, public blockchains, they are doing, Bitcoin has 4.6 transactions per second speed, whereas Hyperledger Fabric has 3,500 transactions per second speed. So whatever minus points of permission blockchains are the advantages of private blockchains. They are not public. We don't want the data to be public. Defense data, healthcare data, logistics data, this need not be public, right? Some we don't want them to be public because of the sensitivity that is associated with the data. Some data we don't need to. Suppose, say, we have DTDC courier, which is transferring so many packages from one place to another place with various centers across the city and across the state. Why is everyone interested in knowing which package is going from which place to other place, right? So that there is no sensitivity attached with that data, but people are not interested. On the other hand, healthcare data and defense data, because of the sensitivity, we don't want them to be public. And scalability, because we are applying them to business transactions, we want to show more scalability in permission blockchains, and they are capable of carrying out more number of transactions per second. And this is one advantage which is not there in economic. You just change the smart contract rules behavior and you'll get a new application in private blockchains. High performance is there, and you have clearly defined structures in private blockchains, as well as high customizability, which is not there in public blockchains. If you want to customize a policy or a rule because something has changed in the world, no, it is not possible in public. They are concrete based, and once they are fixed, it is fixed. That's it. You can't change them. And then access controls, one single entity and it controls access to the blockchain. This we may feel disadvantageous, but there are certain applications where certain single entity control need to be there. Especially now, say universities, for example, you keep blockchain as public and everybody has access to everything in the network, then who is holding the responsibility of giving degrees to the students? Right. So certain applications need that authority or single entity control because somebody need to be responsible for certain tasks. And other advantage is that compared to public blockchains, these are better consensus algorithms, something like Byzantine fault tolerance algorithm or voting based algorithms, which are relatively less which are relatively better energy efficient compared to proof of work. Right. Disadvantages, because you are giving control to single person or single entity, security is entirely reliant on that integrity of that particular member. They are more prone to censorship and regulation. It is easy to tamper the transactions in the private blockchain compared to public blockchain. They are less transparent because of the Data being private, not all transactions are transparent in private blockchains. They are vulnerable to hacks and manipulation, and as well as anonymity is less in private blockchains because you are identified by your membership ID or something. The third category and the last category of our talk is consortium blockchain. It is very difficult to differentiate private blockchains and consortium blockchains because very few differences are there between them. Otherwise, both of them can be called as private blockchain. But we have a different category as consortium blockchains because the purpose of consortium blockchains is different compared to private blockchains. One is, whereas private organizations are restricted to single organization, here consortium blockchains are spanned for multiple organizations. So when I say it is spanned for multiple organizations, that doesn't make the network public, but it is a permission network. But however, who joins in the network is restricted. But however, compared to one single organization, now we will have people from different organizations. And other things, it will work quite similar to private blockchain itself. This is more decentralized and less centralized. In the sense, it is not as decentralized as public blockchain. At the same time, it is not as centralized as private blockchain also. So this is somewhere in the middle. So that is the reason malicious activity is not as easy as it happens in private blockchains. Other thing is that this helps the enterprises to collaborate with each other. They'll be able to get credits and features equally because of their collaboration, as well as competition also. And because of this collaborative environment, there is a research from Deloitte which proves that 74% of the organizations are ready to participate in this consortium blockchains, both as collaborators and competitors. So when it comes to consortium blockchain, the key difference is based on two parameters. One is the number of organizations that are involved in the blockchain and the consensus method. Obviously, consortium blockchain will have multiple number of organizations. And when it comes to consortium, the consensus method differs from private blockchain. Instead of one single system validating the blocks based on their policies, here in consortium consensus method, you will have people from multiple organizations and all of them should agree for a particular transaction to be placed in your blockchain. So this is sort of a hybrid between the low trust that is offered by public blockchains as well as single highly controllable central authority that is offered in private blockchains. Whatever Hyperledger Fabric and Quorum, we call them as private blockchains, but they also can be generalized to consortium blockchains. It's only that you add multiple organizations and also you change the consensus mechanism. Hyperledger Fabric, for that matter, the consensus mechanism that is used in Hyperledger Fabric is a pluggable one. In the sense, what consensus mechanism we want to, it is like a plug and play. Oh no, I don't want this consensus mechanism. I remove it and I plug a different mechanism. So when you are opting for consortium, you change the consensus mechanism there. What are the characteristics that you look here? The consortium is permissioned. It's not as public as public blockchain. It's not for everyone, but at the same time, it is not with a single authority. It is semi-decentralized, as I told you that it is less decentralized compared to public blockchains, but more decentralized compared to private blockchains. It has multi-party consensus. People from multiple organizations should accept or agree for a particular transaction. That is the reason multi-party consensus. And the governance and operating rules are like this. So you have this consortium agreement and participant agreement, where in this consortium agreement, there will be different people, the founding members, the participating members. There can be non-participating members also who doesn't participate anything in the network. They may not even be able to do any transactions in the network, but they are part of the network. For example, I can give an example, something like the temporary staff that we take in universities or organizations. They don't play any role in decision making or governing bodies, but they are part of the network. And then these people, the founding members, consortium promoter, participating members, everybody form your governance board, and they will decide what are the decisions to be implemented on your network. Then that will form the operating rules. Based on that, your smart contracts will be defined, your behavior rules will be defined, which will be taken with help of the blockchain technology, and then they are shared on the ledger platform for the participants to follow. Other few more characteristics are faster speed compared to public blockchains, because everyone is known and everyone is identified user. Scalability is very high compared to public blockchains. Low transaction costs, low energy consumption. What all are the things that we have in private blockchain? So I'll not repeat them again. And also, whatever risk that you have in public blockchains, that 51% attack is relatively, I don't say I agree with this saying there is no risk of 51% attack. What theoretically happens and what happens in reality on a real-time environment is different. Yeah, relatively the risk of 51% attack is less in consortium blockchain compared to public blockchains, because people from different organizations has to come together to form that 51% majority. And especially if this 51% majority has to be coming from organizations that are competing with each other, it is difficult to gain that 51% majority. That is the reason we say there is no 51% attack. But if they can be compromised, again that risk will be there here in consortium also. No criminal activity, the same reason why there is no criminal activity in permission blockchain, it is because we don't have unidentified users in our network. And then one more thing that I want to say is that that part was cut from the slide, but the regulations. The governance body will be forming the regulations, and regulations are quite flexible compared to public blockchains. The same justification given in private blockchains, why it is easy to, or why it is relatively easy to change the governance body regulations. It is highly impossible in public blockchains, relatively easy in much easier in private blockchains. And when it comes to consortium blockchains, there need to be an agreement among all the parties that can be changed. Then it is possible to change rules in consortium blockchain governance rules. Advantages: semi-decentralized. Who wants not so centralized, not so decentralized applications? Semi-decentralized will be very advantageous and beneficial. More security compared to private blockchains, because now you have participants from multiple organizations, so compromises do not happen so easily. Relatively more security, and because you have identified members, you don't have this man in the middle, DDoS attacks, or the other things, Sybil attacks and all. It offers you greater privacy because all the users are verified, and these verified blocks are also not exposed to public. So that is the reason more privacy, low fees compared to public blockchains, better consensus because you also follow similar to private blockchains, high throughput. So this is the throughput in numbers. If you see, Bitcoin blockchain is transmitting around 15 to 2700 transactions per 10 minutes, whereas consortium blockchain can optimize 1000 transactions per second. So you can see the throughput variancy when it comes to public and private as well as consortium blockchains. Because we look for what type of consensus that doesn't require much energy, there is no mining required, no carbon prints, and more sustainability. Disadvantages: when it comes to disadvantages of consortium blockchains are vulnerable to malicious players, because when there are obviously when there are people from multiple organizations, and especially when these organizations are competing with each other, there will be a lot of competition between the companies, and in this what you call in this fight of competing with each other, they may try to harm the transactions that are made by the competing things. So there is vulnerability, but it is easy to caught them, easy to find out who is corrupt. The other disadvantage with consortium blockchains is standardization. As I have been telling earlier also, blockchain interoperability is a major issue with respect to with respect to all blockchains, since there is no standardization available, and if multiple organizations have to come together, and if they are using different blockchains, since there is no standardization, it is difficult to bring all of them together. Also, when multiple organizations come together, and for a particular transaction to be kept in the blockchain, all these parties should accept to that, and for that convincing of the parties, it will bring down the overall development of the blockchain. So these are a few industries in which consortium is more applicable, like finance and banking. Group of banks come together. Every bank will have its own blockchain. However, they form a consortium, because that is the reason we are able to keep any ATM card in any ATM machine and get the money, because of the consortium that they have. Logistics, right? So the supply chain management, everything, healthcare and insurance. Healthcare itself is a different blockchain, insurance is a different blockchain, but somebody opting for healthcare had an insurance claim. So consortium blockchain in such scenarios works well. All these are. All these consortium blockchains, Ripple, Hyperledger Fabric, Corda, Quorum, Tendermint, all these provide open source solutions where the skeleton blockchain structure is available, and you can simply what to do, you can write your smart contracts over them, and you can start using that consortium blockchain. These are a few working consortium projects available as of now. For some of them are for trading money, some of them are for supply chain management, and some of them are for cryptocurrency sort of. I'll skip these things with very little to tell, because the consensus algorithms are not my topic, but I have taken them because different blockchains use different consensus mechanisms, because the reason is that because of their characteristics, because of the purpose of why those blockchains are covered, they use different blockchains. Proof of work is very familiar in public blockchains, for that matter. Proof of stake is also very familiar in public blockchains. However, the disadvantage part of proof of work is that it wastes a lot of computational resources and power and energy. That is the reason people started moving. In fact, proof of work is really interesting. In this equation of what you have is that you need to find out that nonce value, where it is concatenated with the previous block's hash value and the transactions to be approved, and you will be assigned a difficulty level. And how do you find that nonce value? Nothing but a trial and error mechanism, unless that you don't have any special maths involved in that. Only thing is that you should have more and more and more computing capability with you. That is the reason I said that the more the mining capability you have, the more the control you have over the transactions on your blockchain. So brute force is the only way that you can have. However, the disadvantage here is that I'll skip these slides. The disadvantage is that it is very energy consuming. So people opted for a more energy saving alternative to proof of work, where you prove the ownership of the amount or the stakes that you have. The belief is that the more stakes that you have in the network, the less harm that you will cause to the network. In the sense, you don't want the network demand to go down because you have more stakes. That is the reason you will not work in a reverse direction in the development of the network. So it is basically like when you have more stakes, you will get the proof of ownership, and thereby you will have more say on the transactions per second. This is simply like the rich getting richer. So whoever have more stakes will have more control over the transactions. They'll add some more transactions in their blockchain. They'll have one more blockchain in their network, and the number of stakes that they have in their network will keep increasing. And the one who is poor doesn't get a chance to add few more transactions because of this proof of stake. So, however, the mining cost is nearly zero. You are not saving. You are not um, putting lot of energy and power consumption and computing resources to a waste in proof of stake relatively. In fact, Ethereum is planning to move from ET hash to Casper. ET hash is a proof of work consensus algorithm, but now slowly they are moving to Casper, which is a proof of stake algorithm. And proof of stake have various variants. It is not only proof of stake to keep it or to generalize it. We call it as proof of authority, where we have proof of activity. The more activity you are there in the network, the more you have on the transactions. Or proof of capacity, proof of importance, proof of storage, proof of deposit. You deposit more for uh, to get your transactions approved, something of that sort. These are all various variants of proof of stake. However, then came the permission. These are all those algorithms that are used in public blockchains. Proof of work is not energy efficient. However, proof of stake capacity allow relatively better energy efficiency. But as I said, in proof of stake and proof of capacity, it's only the rich gets richer. Then we have delegated proof of stake, which is used in private blockchains, which happens from here onwards. The consensus algorithms follow a voting mechanism. How the voting mechanism happens is different, but more or less, all these algorithms follow on a voting mechanism. They allow the transactions to be approved by following a process of voting. They choose certain people as they elect certain people as their delegates, and then based on their delegates proof of stake, they will be having a say on the respective what you call on the respective say on the transactions that will be kept in a blockchain. So this limits the centralization tendency. And then we have practical Byzantine fault tolerance, which is again used in permissioned blockchains, where in permission blockchains, what we have here in this practical Byzantine fault tolerance is you have three phases: pre-prepared, prepared, and commit, where in each phase a particular participant should get votes from more than 2/3 of the users. Clearly saying majority thing. So when you have votes from more than 2/3 users, you will move from pre-prepared phase to prepared phase. And the advantage here is that there is no hashing procedure involved. Only thing is that just based on majority, you keep moving from pre-prepared to prepared and prepared to commit. So thereby, because we say that this is Byzantine fault tolerant, you can handle up to 1/3 malicious users in permission blockchains. Till 1/3 malicious, till your network is or your network is capable of handling less up to 1/3 malicious by users in the network. Ripple is another consensus algorithm used in another permission blockchain, Ripple network, where the Ripple server has a unique node list to the query, and if 80% of them agree for that transaction which was kept in the query, that will be passed. Otherwise, it will be not passed. Tendermint also has its own consensus algorithm similar to Ripple, where it has 3 steps: pre-vote, pre-commit, and commit step. And unless you have more than 2/3 of the majority, you will be not be moving to the other phase, say to pre-commit step, and from there to commit step. Only thing is that unlike Ripple, Tendermint asks you to lock some of your coins to become validators. We lock them because if there is some malicious activity that is done, all your coins will be you will be losing those deposited coins as means of penalty or punishment. So I'll not compare these consensus algorithms because That is not our part. But as I told, we have various consensus algorithms. Some are for apt for public blockchain, some are apt for permission blockchains. Whatever be the consensus mechanism that you apply in permission blockchains, the key strategy used is voting mechanism. Okay, you may ask for some lockup of coins, you may not ask for lockup of coins, you may ask for some deposit, all are different. But the key strategy that we use is voting mechanism. And when it comes to consortium also follows that voting mechanism consensus algorithms itself. Proof of work and proof of stake are designed for public blockchains, but when it comes to consortium, since fewer participants are there, a voting based system is used, which have low latency and high speed also. That is the reason, another reason these voting mechanism algorithms help you in having more number of transactions per speed. Now coming to that part of comparison of all the three categories of public, private and consortium. Sometimes I will limit my comparison to permissioned and permissionless, because consortium we consider them in permission category. Only when there is a variation, I'll specify them specifically. But before looking at how different they are from each other, they are all of the same family, blockchain family. So we'll first look at the similarities and then we'll see at the dissimilarities. Similarities are all of them are distributed ledgers, all of them are network of keys. So multiple versions of the same data will be located at various places. Because of that, all of them are immutable, because multiple data copies of the data is placed at multiple places. They become immutable automatically. They cannot be modified or altered without having sufficient power. What is that sufficient power that you need is that in public blockchains, the sufficient power that you need is that 51% majority. In private blockchains, with some knowledge about the transactions, you can alter the transactions. However, you will be easily caught. It is like having a CCTV in the room. And both permissioned and permissionless blockchains make use of consensus mechanisms. They have a way for reaching an agreement. However, the consensus mechanisms that they use are different. So public blockchains use proof of work, proof of stake, proof of capacity, where in all these things, forget about energy efficiency. Proof of work, proof of stake, proof of capacity, anything, you prove that you are the authority. You are proving that in permissionless blockchains. In permission blockchains, you are proving your authority based on majority or based on voting mechanism. So this is another comparison. I think this is something that I have shown you in the beginning itself, this table. So we'll skip it and go to a different table. Yeah. So this is a comparison. I hope you are able to see. Are you able to see the contents of the table?
Yes, madam.
Yes, I take it as a yes. Thank you. So when it comes to comparison among the three blockchains, accessibility and data handling, or accessibility for that matter, if you say it is the access is to everyone and anyone in public, only to few people or a single organization in private, and only to and limited to multiple organizations in consortium. Data handling in the sense everybody can read and write in public blockchains. Only members can read and write in private and consortium. Who are those members? Are they limited to single or multiple organization? Depends on if it is a private blockchain or consortium blockchain. The transaction speed is very low, and it is relatively on a higher side in private blockchain. And when it comes to consortium, it is more than public blockchains but less than private blockchains. So consortium stays somewhere in the middle between public and private. Participants are totally anonymous in public blockchain, not anonymous in private and consortium, because you can identify them with their membership authority. When it comes to consensus, public blockchains have proof of work, proof of stake, proof of capacity sort of thing. And when it comes to private or exclusively permission blockchains, the consensus is through smart contracts or the legal contracts that you are binded by. And proof of authority also there, both in consortium and permission blockchains, depending on voting or multi-party consensus sort of thing. Token mechanism is not necessary in private and consortium blockchains, but it is there in public blockchains. When it comes to financial effects, the infrastructure cost is low in public blockchains, low infrastructure cost because you are not maintaining a single server sort of thing. No maintenance of centralized servers and system administrators. It is all decentralized. But when it comes to the financial effects of private blockchains, there is a little amount of server setup that you need to make in private and consortium blockchains. However, the transaction cost fee is less in private and consortium blockchains. It is more in public blockchains. Business effects. If you bring business and the political scenario into blockchains, public blockchains has the capacity to disrupt the entire current business model. That is the reason people are not able to accept Bitcoin still now in many countries, because it totally disrupts the current existing business models. Can you imagine a world where there is no bank at all? For that matter, all these banks are again controlled by many political and business organizations, if not the national banks, many private banks. So if you totally remove that concept of banks from the entire business model, that will be a very hard blow on their businesses. That is the reason for these political reasons also, many countries are not accepting these public blockchains, especially in their business models. Whereas permissioned blockchains and consortium blockchains, they don't replace the existing, or they don't disrupt the existing models, but they replace the existing models, saying I provide better security, better scalability and throughput. So it is like you don't you have a better technology to carry forward your business to a further levels. That's it. You are not going to disrupt the entire business model. Model remains the same. Only thing, this acts as a technology booster for your business model. Decentralization is complete in public. Everything is decentralized. Consortium also is decentralized, whereas in private blockchains, decentralization is partial. It is up to us up to the governance body to decide how much your centralization need to be there. Immutability, it is very much possible in public blockchains, highly immutable, not possible to tamper your documents or your transactions once committed on the network, whereas it is partially possible in private and consortium blockchains. This is a similar thing, but however, only thing that I would like to bring to your notice is the features that are there in public versus consortium and private. It is censorship resistance. So what type of transactions can happen? See, once you approve Bitcoin sort of transactions, if the terrorists are able to do business transactions, you don't have control over them. That is the reason many governing bodies are very hesitant to bring it again. Right, censorship resistant. There is no control on who can join in the network. In such a scenario, so much amount of black money or money for illegal activities can flow in these public blockchains. There could be a possibility. I'm not saying it is flowing. It could be a possibility because of the anonymous nature of the network. You have unregulated and cross-border payments that are happening, and there is support of native assets, anonymous identities. Although they are so good to listen, when it comes to real time, they may cause a lot of law and order issues in your respective domains or with respect to governing bodies. Then when it comes to private or what you call the other one, consortium blockchain, they are highly regulated businesses. You have identified users and legal standards and governance rules that you need to follow in that network. You have efficient throughput. There is less transaction fee. Infrastructure rules are easier to manage. If you feel for a particular governing rule is not acceptable or not possible to implement, or you want to change it, it is possible in both consortium as well as private blockchains. It is not possible in public blockchains. And it also provides you better protection against external disturbances. So if you few applications that we need to look into. Cryptocurrency is the only application that we have in mind when we started talking about bitcoins and blockchains. And slowly, people, as I told you, as the second generation of blockchain technology came into existence, people started to use it altogether for a different thing. And now, not with respect to cryptocurrency, blockchains are more popular for decentralized apps. DApps, we call them in short. So decentralized apps are very popular with the underlying blockchains as a technology. So enterprises like Walmart are looking for these consortium features so that they can have this tracking and traceability of food products and all. Banks are looking at private blockchains. Companies like BitPC are looking for better banking services across the cross-border payments are a very big issue, and blockchains are providing greater solutions for them. Uh, and then accounting firms are looking at the immutability and transparency features of blockchains, both in public as well as consortium blockchains. Then comes, this is a one scenario I would like to just tell you why we are using blockchains. I'll tell you, I'm also reinforcing my focus saying that blockchains do not do computations. They do not do computations. They are more for data storage. They are more for distributed ledgers, which can be distributed as well as public. For example, look at this example where in a pharmaceutical and food supply chains, where perishable items which have an expiry date and they need to be stored in temperature controlled environment. There can be a change in, there can be a lapse in expiry date, there can be a temperature fluctuation that happens, which affects the quality and the safety of these items. In such a scenario, especially in this food supply chain, there are a number of trading partners, logistic providers, insurances, regulatory bodies, everybody will be there, and they need to have access to that reliable information of what went wrong when a particular incident happened. In such business to business scenarios, this blockchain can serve as a historical record of transactions. No corruption will be allowed, high transparency will be there, and thereby these processes can be easily automated. This is something I'll not say much about it, but something like software as a service, now blockchain as a service is coming very much. As I told you, blockchain as a service is possible only with permission and consortium blockchains, because that will not disrupt your business. That will only enhance your business by providing you better scalability, better throughput, and better collaboration in with respect to your business. So if you want more knowledge or more information on blockchain as a service, you can look at Dragon Chain, which is providing this blockchain as a service. So these are the latest these are the latest blockchains that are very much popular in the last 1-2 years especially, and we'll look at what is the network they are using, what is the consensus type, whether they are paid blockchains or open source blockchains, and the supporting languages. Ethereum, no doubt, once the second generation of blockchain technology came into existence, Ethereum has been gaining more and more popularity. It is because you have decoupled the smart contract from your blockchain. Just change the rules in the smart contract, it comes out with a new application. The consensus type, however, is proof of work in Ethereum, but Ethereum is working really hard. The proof of work algorithm that they use is known as ET hash. It is working really hard to move from ET hash to Casper, which is a relatively energy efficient consensus algorithm. The pricing that they have is utility tokens. They are Ether coins that they use. And the supported languages in which you can write your smart contracts are Python, Go, and C++, followed by Solidity language. And then Hyperledger Fabric is another permissioned blockchain, whereas Ethereum is public. Hyperledger Fabric is more for B2B and B2C use cases, where it is more permission blockchain. And the consensus type, as I told you, is a pluggable framework. In the sense, if you are using it for only permission blockchains, you have a different mechanism. And when it comes to consortium blockchain, you want a different consensus algorithm, you can simply remove that algorithm and keep a The advantage here in Hyperledger Fabric is everything is in individual components, just need to integrate them and use them as a blockchain, where consensus is used as an individual isolated component. And right now, the consensus algorithm that is used in Hyperledger Fabric is Raft algorithm. This is an open source algorithm. You can download the code and use it, sort of thing. And Python is a supporting language for Hyperledger Fabric. Then we have open chain and multi-chain blockchains, which are very much popular. Both are open source and both are permission blockchains. Only thing is that depending on the consensus type of algorithm that they use, they are different. Open chain uses partition consensus, whereas multi-chain uses more on a voting mechanism. And EOS is another permission blockchain where they go for delegated proof of stake. We have seen that a certain set of delegates will be chosen, and they will be playing the role of keeping which transactions to keep in a blockchain. This is also open source, and this is used in C++, is a supporting language. Then we have Ripple. Ripple is very much used. What you call it is a permission blockchain. Again, it is used for probabilistic voting. Probabilistic voting in the sense, again, you go for this voting mechanism where you at least 2/3 of the votes need to be accepted. You need to get at least 2/3 of the votes to move from one what you call one phase to the other phase. And the respective blockchain is open source, free. It is available. You can simply download the particular code and start using it. The language that is supported is Python language, and Ripple is very much used for cross-border payment solutions. In fact, many banks like ICICI Bank and all these things use this for cross-border payment to make cross-border payments very smoother. Right. With all these things, right, these are a few blockchains that you want to look into for various categories. So, coming to the conclusion, we have seen various types of blockchain networks, their pros and cons, their advantages, disadvantages, the key characteristics. Now, one question, the final question before we conclude: which one is better? Which one is superior, for that matter? So, if we start that, fundamentally speaking, public, private, and consortium blockchains are not competing with each other. They are not at odds. They are just different technologies. It's only that you need to figure out which technology is apt for you. There can be a number of programming languages available in the sense. We use it only with, we use one which is better for our application. Similarly, public blockchains, for that matter, they excel when you want to have censorship resistance. You don't want people being stopped to join in the network. Public chains are a great way, but they come with the cost of speed and throughput. That are better for greater security assurances on transactions settlements, because the security and privacy provided by public blockchains is far ahead compared to private and consortium blockchains. But if priority is system speed, private blockchains are a great choice. They are ideal for situations where one individual or one entity need to be in control and information need to be kept private. In such scenarios, private blockchains are a great choice. And consortium blockchains, you can opt them when you want to mitigate the risk of private blockchains. Say, I don't want one single centralized authority, but still I need to have control on who are the users that are joining in my network, and my data need to be private. In such a scenario, consortium blockchains are a great say. They perform much effectively compared to public blockchain. They appear, and when communication and collaboration are a major say, in such scenarios, consortium blockchains work better. So these are a few references. There are no specific academic papers on comparison of these blockchain papers. You need to have a lot of industry information. The reason for that is because a number of especially consortium and permission blockchains are in a experimental phase. People are experimenting with them and they are seeing how they can be function better when compared to blockchain and all. So that's it about. I hope I am able to cover that in time. So any queries?
Participants, if you have any queries, you can ask.
So yeah, any queries I can.
There is a question in chat.
Madam, chat box lo question ఉంది madam.
Yeah. I just opened the chat box. Just give me
Yes,
a
madam,
second.
please.
Can cryptocurrency replace current
No, I'm coming from the beginning, so we'll go one by one. Who will regulate or monitor the blockchains? There is no regulatory body, as I said, in public blockchains, there is no regulatory body. Whatever all the governance rules are there, they will be kept in the smart contract of the blockchain itself and they will be triggered automatically. However, when it comes to permission and consortium blockchains, you have regulatory bodies to govern your blockchains. So in electronic voting, Ethereum is only the option. At one point of time, yeah, Ethereum is the only option because there are not many number of public blockchains available. But now there are a number of public blockchains available. But because voting is electronic voting, especially for government issues, is a very sensitive matter. So people are apprehensive on choosing a blockchain because you want 100% accuracy. And as of now, there is no blockchain which was tested thoroughly. Any software, any technology for that matter has to go through certain amount of testing time to ensure its accuracy and capability. Since these are very recent technologies, no technology have gone through the testing time period. That is the reason Ethereum relatively gave better proofs and better results. That is the reason people are looking it as a choice. But yeah, in coming 5-10 years, you will have more options with respect to electronic voting also. Why blockchain requires proof of work for a new block? See, why blockchain requires proof of work is that when there are anonymous number of users, in the network, some of them may be malicious. We don't know. Some of them may be malicious. Some of them may not be malicious. In such a scenario, how are you going to allow the transactions? The transactions need to be verified and kept in the network. Right? How do I ensure that the transactions that I am going to keep or the blockchain is going to keep in the network are not malicious transactions, are not from a malicious user? There are almost 6 levels of verifications that happen before a transaction is kept in the network. So, just to ensure only, see, why does and all these verifications happen at various steps, and proof of work is one way of ensuring that only authorized or on only what you call honest users are placing their transactions on it. So we need some consensus mechanism, right? So if there are 100 users in the network, everyone want their transactions to be kept in the network, but there are only limited number of transactions that you keep in a block. Then how do you 100 people have 100 transactions in their hand? Everyone want their transactions to be kept in the block, but a block can keep only say 20 transactions. Which 20 are you going to select? You need some consensus mechanism, isn't it? So proof of work is such one consensus mechanism. Then can cryptocurrency replace current currency? Not so soon. Because see, when we talk about India has not accepted Bitcoin as a legal entity. That's what I told you in the beginning. There are few other countries which have accepted Bitcoins in the sense that as far as the new currency is valid, this Bitcoin currency is also valid. But as of now, there is no place in the entire world where the cryptocurrency has completely replaced by the current currency. Few countries have not accepted it. In such a scenarios, we are only using it as research purposes and experimental purposes. People are not really using it in their day-to-day activity. Some countries have accepted. There also large business organizations are using these cryptocurrencies in par with normal current currency. Replacing of cryptocurrency in place of the original monetary currency may not happen very soon, because people have opted out of it, and now people are looking more variations of blockchains. They are not limited to Bitcoin and cryptocurrency. They have what you call uh, identified that Bitcoin blockchains can be used more than being a currency explorer. So they are using for decentralized apps and all, and this has gained more prominence, and lot of work is happening with respect to decentralized apps and all, not more on currency. Personally, I feel that there will not be a year where cryptocurrency is replaced by current currency. Is it possible to have inter-blockchain like it? Consortium blockchains, hybrid blockchains are where these inter-blockchains are coming because of the interoperability and standardization issues. This has not gained prominence, but if there is once standardization has established in this blockchain domain, probably this inter-blockchains can gain more prominence. So some of them have asked for the projects that can be carried by students of EG and PG. They can explore GitHub, where there are a number of projects already there. And when it comes to projects to be carried out, PG not sure about UG, but PG students, they can explore the various consensus mechanisms, privacy issues, privacy mechanisms. And also there are a lot of security. I being a cryptography domain person, myself, I am exploring more on the security and privacy challenges that are there, and there are a number of loopholes where security mechanisms can be enhanced in blockchains. Madam, do we need permission blockchain for ticketing? I'm sorry, I didn't get the question. What do you mean by ticketing? Unless I know what is ticketing, I cannot answer this question. I'll move on to the other questions. Maybe if Bharati comes back, she can tell me what is ticketing. Is blockchain really strong? Yes, it's really strong in terms of security, but not in terms of computation.
Madam, it is for event ticketing. It is Bharati, ma'am.
Yeah, Bharati, tell me.
It is about event ticketing. Certain events are organized and we want to book ticket, and using QR code we want to do the scanning. This type of project can be done using blockchain. Even if it could be done, is it permissioned or permissionless blockchain, ma'am?
Two things, Bharati. Event ticketing, as I told you that blockchain's more focus is on data storage and data distribution. Right, it will not do any processing. If there is some processing you need to do, you have to opt for some smart contract and write a code in such a way that a particular event triggers because of certain conditions or at a certain point of time and all these things. Right, Ethereum works for that. You can have a choice of public blockchains like that, but if your data is sensitive, you can opt for permission blockchains.
Okay, ma'am. Thanks a lot.
Right. So I think with that the questions are finished. If there are any other questions, I can take them.
Yeah, good afternoon, madam.
Yes, sir.
Yeah, how to store the blockchain, madam, in database? What are the capacity? What is the strength? What is the size?
Blockchain cannot be stored in a database because blockchain itself is a database ledger.
Right.
Point one. Point two, there is no fixed size for blockchains because blockchain keeps on going. As of now, Bitcoin blockchain is about 17.5 million GB or so in the network. So blockchain keeps on going. So that is the reason scalability is a major parameter we look into when it comes to blockchains, because blockchains keep adding. There is no fixed number, right? So you start with a genesis block and then keep on adding blockchain. There will be some transactions happening that keeps add certain block. How fastly your transactions are happening, based on the transaction speed, you need more space. So you can't
Okay,
fix
madam.
a size for your blockchain, because the blockchain size is not fixed. New
Yeah,
blocks keep
dynamic-
adding on.
Yeah, dynamically it will increases. Okay, okay.
Right, sir.
Right. Okay, thank you, ma'am.
Thank you. So any other questions? Okay. Thanks for bearing me for 1.5 hours. I hope this gives you some some insights into the different types of blockchains, as well as a few clarifications on which type of blockchain can be used for which purpose or which domain. And with this, can I request the organizers? Shall we call it a day, or if there are any more questions, I can take them.
I think
Hello, ma'am.
questions.
Yes.
How can we increase the scalability in Ethereum?
What do you mean by that?
Means if I want to increase the scalability is lower as compared to private blockchain, that is Hyperledger.
Yeah.
If we want to increase the scalability of Ethereum, so how can
No, this is a PhD question that you have asked. It's not even for UG and PG students. That's a PhD problem, in fact. Scalability is an issue in Ethereum, and the people are working on improve its performance. As of now, there are no positive results on that. That is a disadvantage for Ethereum, and people are working for exploring more and more options to ensure that scalability can be enhanced. As of now, there are no positive results on that, Hema. That is a disadvantage for Ethereum, that scalability and performance is low because of the number of users and the public nature of the blockchain. So there is no one single line answer for that. There need to be a number of protocols that need to be explored and experimented to enhance the scalability.
okay, ma'am?
Right. Thank you.
Okay, madam. On behalf of Shobha Bindu madam, I must thank you very much for accepting our request for being part of this program. Really, your session was much informative, where
Thank
it
you.
gives very much information on blockchain types and categories. I think
Thank you.
majority of the participants are benefited out of your session. It's very,
Right.
nice session, madam. Thank you so much, madam, for sparing your time. Hope our
Yeah.
collaboration will continue for future programs as well.
Definitely.
Thank you so
Thank
much.
you very much, sir, and please convey my wishes to Dr. Shobha also.
Thank you.
Thank you. So I'll call it a day, and thank all the participants for being with me.
Okay. With this, we will close for today's session. We will join for the tomorrow.